There are certain acronyms that tell us a world of information and tell us nothing. FBI means Federal Bureau of Investigation, and for so many years it was the sainted organization until we discovered that J. Edgar Hoover, director, was far, far less than a saint, but nonetheless colored American thinking to a great extent. CIA. That means what? Let's see.
Central Intelligence Agency.
Yeah, I forget.
And sometimes, it's the same acronym in Spanish for company.
Company.
La CIA.
Yeah.
The company.
You're hearing from the voice of a guy who knows just about all there is to know about it. He's run the course. He has used a phrase from a pop song of some time ago, Western. He has graduated. He's a graduate because of what?
It's graduation time, and I've had the course with you, was the way the song ran. So.
And you had the course CIA. His name is Dave MacMichel, and he's an ex is a key factor, a CIA operative who was one of the founders of the Association of National Security Alumni. A word about that group, and then, of course, your story, which I find not only fascinating, but a terribly important one for all of us. So, the Association of National Security Alumni is what?
Well, it's a group of former CIA officers, also one or two ex-FBI guys, and people who served in other parts of the United States intelligence system. And we'd been in, I'd say, loose connection with each other for a few years until the Iran-Contra affair erupted on the national consciousness in late 1986. At that time, we organized formally to campaign in a strictly nonpartisan, non-political way for what we regard as necessary change in the intelligence system.
In fact, you were called, you're popularly called, and I meant accurately, whistleblowers. You've blown the whistle on a number of...
Yeah, most of us at one point or another, they say went public by blowing the whistle. In my own case, in 1984, having left the agency a year before, I went public with my opinion that the justification for the Contra war against Nicaragua, the so-called delivery of arms from Managua to the insurgents in El Salvador, was founded on what I told the World Court was scanty and unreliable evidence.
And they're going to ask me, people listening, who is this guy, Dave MacMichel, former CIA operative who did, one of the guys who blew the whistle on the lies being fed the American public, especially during the Iran-Contra affair. And so we come to Dave, so I ask you how it began. Who are you? Where you're from, what you did. I know you were involved in the Korean War and you were wounded, but start in the beginning.
Well, basically, I'm now 66 years old, born in Albany, New York in 1928, grew up around New York City, in northern New Jersey, and as a kid worked on the docks there during the Second World War, and when I turned old enough to go in the armed service in 1946, I enlisted in the Marine Corps, served a couple of years, came out, took my college degree through the GI Bill, went back in as a commissioned officer during the Korean War, and stayed in the regular service until 1959 when, let's say, the commandant and I had differences of opinion.
Well, you were at the front and you got wounded.
Oh, yeah. It was a very brief tour. They got to me, very quickly. And I did a number of things. I served in amphibious reconnaissance, particularly during the 1950s. And as I say, when I resigned my commission in 1959, not knowing what to do in civilian life, I went back to school, took a doctorate in history, taught for a few years.
At the University of Oregon.
Well, I did. I took my degree there, and I did teach there for a while. And then I joined what was then known as the Stanford Research Institute, today SRI International. And partly because of both my academic and military background, I went to work on Department of Defense contracts, first in Central America, and then very early in 1965, it was, I went over to Southeast Asia and was promptly asked to go to work within the United States Embassy in Bangkok for a group, an office headed by a very senior CIA officer. Now, I can give you his name because he wrote a book.
It's all right.
Pierre de Silva. Mm-hmm. And this was the Special Assistant for Counterinsurgency. So we were countering the insurgents there.
Wow, what does that mean, counterinsurgency?
Well, Studs, In the period immediately after the Second World War, when the CIA was being organized and our whole Cold War super and substructures were being put together, the official thinking was that our enemy, the Soviet Union, was occupation of Eastern Europe. You see, was an analog of the German occupation of Western Europe during the Second World War. You see, so as a matter of fact, what we were doing, when I went through the Special Forces, the Army Special Forces School in the mid-'50s, you see, the whole thinking was that the objective was, as in, the OSS had done during the Second World War, was to organize resistance groups, you see, inside the occupied territories of Eastern Europe, so to speak. And so that was the way the whole thinking went. But what was happening, actually, as you think back to the 1950s and 60s, that period leading up to the Vietnam War, was that the great, post-colonial liberation movements going on were insurgencies against our allies in the West. So you had this flip
Against
that came.
France and Vietnam.
Yeah, sure. So the flip was that all of a sudden these forces that we had trained, you see, to organize resistance to the Soviets, you see, found themselves being employed in ways of attempting to suppress groups being aided, in fact, by the Soviets to overthrow colonial regimes. So that was what counterinsurgency was all about.
So they were indigenous movements to a great extent.
They were all indigenous movements, sure.
So we had so this is.
I mean, look, you're an Irishman, Studs, and
Not really.
Well, you can be one if you want. But who in fact was supporting the Irish movement for independence during the First World War?
Yeah.
Of course, it was the Germans. I mean, you take your help where you can find it.
Yeah. So this is the story. This is how it began. So now you had not yet joined, become a member, an operative of the CIA.
No. As a matter of fact, I didn't do this until rather late in my career officially. I had done, as I say, worked in, especially in Southeast Asia, working very closely with the agency, counterinsurgency operations there, and then had done some studies, for the agency. As I used to say, I was a big thinker in a small way, as I said at one point. And in 1980, I happened to be back in Washington, D.C., doing some work for a private client. And the agency had just organized its in-house think tank at the National Intelligence Council, the analytic group there. And I was
agency meaning CIA.
Yeah, CIA. Yeah. So
also called company.
As the company, yeah, if you will. And as I say, I was a known quantity to them. They contacted me and hired me to go to work for this think group at the National Intelligence Council. And there because partly of my academic background and other stuff, I specialized in Western Hemisphere affairs.
So what did they say to you when you joined to join the CIA? What did they say to you the work would be, or the reason for this group?
Well, it was basically the guy who organized this, and I can give you his name because he came very public himself as a whistleblower during the Robert Gates hearings several years ago, Mr. Hal Ford. Very senior, very distinguished agency guy who was concerned that the premier product of the intelligence system, the national intelligence estimates, had become devalued over the years, and he wanted to, get better minds and put out a better product. And this was his approach to it. He hired me. He said because I remind him of a Renaissance man. I said utility infielder would be more like it. So so I worked for him a couple of years.
So where were you first job? Where were you stationed?
No, we were right there at Langley.
Langley. So you went to school at Langley, Virginia.
No. I didn't even go. I was brought in laterally. I mean, I was supposedly qualified for what I was going to do. I never went through the farm.
Because you had the previous experience.
Well, that's what they thought.
So where were you stationed as the CIA?
Well, at the CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. There.
Oh, you were in Langley.
Oh, that's right.
And then what was your work?
Well, basically, what I was responsible for doing, working under the National Intelligence Officer for the Western Hemisphere, was a preparation of both the special and general estimates on the situation in Latin America. And of course, at that time, the big focus was on Central America, on El Salvador. And then after Mr. Casey came in, of course, we organized the Contra War against Nicaragua, and that was a very heavy
Well, we have to start. We have to go. Naturally, the story is Dave MacMichel. What made you take another course? You at the beginning, you were. Could I describe you as gung ho at the beginning?
Well, you could. You
Yeah.
could. I suppose I was not. I've never been what you might call an ideologue, but
No.
I was responding to something that my background suited me. I thought to do. You're asking me like where I went wrong, as they have I'm
Yeah,
sure
where did you
frequently
go-
asked
where did
themselves,
you go
where did this
wrong?
guy go wrong? And basically, I was doing some, under by direction, analyses of the whole quasi-military situation in Central America, and
While you were in Langley.
yeah,
in Central
and
America.
what I couldn't find, Studs, you see, was the evidence which the administration was loudly proclaiming it had publicly of this flow of arms from Nicaragua to El Salvador, which was the official justification for the organization of the Contra War against Nicaragua. And I found myself, constantly, running up against difficulties because I couldn't, and I was, fighting that situation. So I served there for 2 years. The appointment to the group was 2 years. I don't want to get to the
That's okay.
technicality of that, but I was a regular officer of this. I was not a contract officer. And when I'd finished my stint there, I'd made myself sufficiently unpopular with certain people at higher
Because you
levels.
were asking questions over there.
Well, I'd put it another way. I wasn't giving them the answers that they wanted. They were asking me the questions.
Now, when you say that you weren't given the answers they wanted,
Yeah.
could you just explain that slightly?
Sure. What was wanted, you see, were analyses of the situation, which would demonstrate a number of things. First of all, it was a fixed position. There was no such thing as an indigenous insurgent movement. You see, it all had to be directed from Moscow. Matter of fact, I was.
This is the answer they wanted.
Oh yeah, you had to track it from. It was the axis, so-called, was Moscow, Havana, Managua, and then on to El Salvador. And you can argue this, and I suppose you could say you could present some evidence of it, But there's a problem here, and I'm gonna digress for a moment because it's important for all kinds of business, the intelligence business particularly. See, people will frequently ask you, "Where is your proof?" And stuff. You see, well, the best you can say in that business, here is the evidence. You see, because proof, as I don't need to tell you, results from placing evidence before a tribunal qualified to rule upon its validity. You see, and see whether it constitutes proof or not. Now, in this case, we were dealing with stuff. I'll tell you this one right off the top. For example, a unilateral decision was made somewhere that when we got intercepts of messages about the shipment of educational supplies from Cuba to Nicaragua, you see, is that arbitrarily it was decided that references to notebooks, you see, or textbooks was references to AKA rifles, and that references to pencils and pens was reference to quantities of ammunition. There was no evidence ever brought forward to do that, but this suited people when they wanted to do that. So it got to be a pretty, silly exercise.
So they're asking you to come up with that, say that was so, and you say, but it isn't so.
I said, I can't intellectually, sign off on a report that says that.
Their premise was, the postulate was, Soviets are behind this. These are not indigenous movements. And you're finding out the opposite is the case.
I won't say that, because certainly the then Soviet Union was very, very supportive of these movements. It suited their long-range purposes as well. Did they organize and direct them? The answer to that, from my opinion, of course, is no.
And we're talking to David MacMichel, former member of the CIA, as you may gather by now. It's a pretty good detective story. It's John le Carre. It's everything here.
Hardly
Dave
that.
MacMichel, a CIA guy, and his questioning what he's doing, and therefore disturbing the big boys who want a set answer as part of the Cold War. Now they're starting to, you're getting to be a pain in the neck to them.
I had heard that in various ways. And, when I completed what was the way this in-house think tank that I referred to had been set up, the idea that people would serve their 2-year tours with it and then return to their home offices. Well, I had no home office. I came in from the outside. And, it was eventually made clear to me, incidentally by Mr. Ford, that there was too much pressure and that I couldn't continue there. So, I'm interested in maintaining a job, Studs. Believe me, I got, things to do. But it was made clear to me that, I wasn't exactly welcome in other offices. Part of it was because I'd been brought in at a fairly high rank, pay grade, and people don't like to have their budgets busted. The other was, I was had a reputation. And so I left. As a matter of fact, I took an outside contract with
You
them.
left the CIA.
Oh, yeah. I took an outside contract with them for a few months. And I got thinking more and more about this stuff, and I said, well, I'm going to have to start doing some traveling. I'd save some money. And I went down to Central America, and I was just mooching around, taking a look. And I happened to be in Nicaragua at the time of the harbor mining incident of 1984.
That's when our military, mined the harbors of
Nicaragua. That is
in
correct.
violation of
International law, among other things, yes. And causing, by the way, several deaths of foreign individuals. And the objective of this, by the way, was to discourage shipping from calling at Nicaraguan ports because the insurance rates go up enormously, when you have things like this happen. And it occurred to me at that time that some of the, dare I use a technical term here,
Please.
some of the Looney Tunes that I knew, that I've been working with were possibly ginning up for the catastrophe of a direct invasion in Central America. And
There
subsequently,
was that talk.
That's right. And subsequently, we know that that decision was very close to being made.
It was that
yeah.
we might invade Nicaragua.
Yeah.
At Sandinista time, of course.
Yeah, of course. So I thought if I were going to say anything, I should do it sooner, than after the fact. And all I cared to say, Studs, because I had signed the secrecy agreement, never to reveal classified information and all that good stuff, right, is that I did not wish to be prosecuted, first of all. I'm no martyr, I can assure you of that. And so I thought I was in a good position because, first of all, I contacted an excellent lawyer, Mel Wolfe, of the formerly the ACLU, whom you know. Right. And what I did was say, I'm not going to reveal any classified information. I said, what I'm going to say is, you ain't got any classified information to reveal that would prove what you're saying. And so for a brief time, I got my Warholian 15 minutes of front page stuff. And as a matter of fact, wound up going to testify at the International Court of Justice in the case of Nicaragua versus the United States, where, as you know, the International Court found the United States guilty on 12 of 14 counts of violating Nicaragua's customary and treaty international law rights in this affair. And, found myself just through that process linking up more and more with other people, John Stockwell, Ralph McGee.
These are former CIA guys. John Stockwell was with the Bureau Chief at Angola. Ralph McGee was, I forget where now.
He was in Vietnam and Thailand.
Thailand. Mm-hmm. Phil Rettinger was in Guatemala. Right. He helped on the overthrow of a legally elected guy named Jacobo Arbenz, working for the CIA.
That's right.
These are the guys you...
Yeah, these guys and several others, we began to correspond more. And then an event happened, you see, which was the crash of the famous plane carrying Eugene Hassenfuss of La Crosse, Wisconsin, in Nicaragua, a plane carrying all sorts of arms and causing the unraveling, you see, of what became known as Iran-Contra. And we figured that if there were ever a time, that it would be possible, to take advantage of the situation and get some necessary change, some better regulation, some better control, some more congressional supervision of the intelligence system, this was the time to do it. And we felt and I think rightly, that we had some credibility as people who had worked in the system, and most of us at reasonably high levels, to to come forward and be listened to. And I think, Studs, if I hate to sound discouraged, but one of the great lessons learned from Iran-Contra, you see, is that when everything is exposed and nothing is done, all that happens is you reinforce the existing system. So that's been a rather discouraging part of this, but we worked hard at it, and I'm proud of what we have done.
Well, we have to continue big. With Iran-Contra, why nothing happened? So much exposed, and perhaps you could talk about that. But before that, you mentioned the various other CIA guys, agency heads in many cases, or bureau heads. How did you know about the other guys? You sensed, you heard about others, and the discomfiture with what was going on and the disenchantment. Like, say, John Stockwell in Angola, Phil Redinger. Mm-hmm. I interviewed Phil Redinger for a forthcoming book, and he spoke of you, getting in touch with you there.
Yeah.
Was there a word spread? Is that it?
Well, it's a rather small community, Studs, and word spread. People whom I did not know or just simply knew of through their books and so forth, they began to call me up, and in the case of Redinger, I was a little dismayed when this long, tall, bald-headed guy who identified himself as a former CIA officer shows up and finds me at an address in Central America where I had no idea anybody knew where I was. So I said, "What is this?" But we got together and held a number of press conferences and worked very hard to push for our agenda.
Now we got to go to the big one. A moment ago you were saying stuff revealed and yet nothing happened.
Yeah.
We have to come to our country right now at this moment. Stuff was revealed. We have to talk about the media, the press itself, certain journalists perhaps, and members of the CIA and certain congressmen, perhaps both Democratic, seemingly investigating this, and Republican. We have to come. Why don't you tell it from your vantage point as to what happened and what the American public thinks about it, if it does or if it cares? So you have to get into and this also involves radio, TV, and the press. Where do you begin? The ball is yours. Start anywhere you want to.
Well, all right. Let's start this, Studs, and this is a mistake to do. Start it here. Let's start it at the constitutional level, will you?
All right.
Now, we have a country which is organized to be run in a certain way, right? And this is a government which is accountable, supposedly, to the electorate. And when you establish an extra constitutional structure within that government, and from the very beginning, Studs, the CIA and the official term used is a very fuzzy and warm one. It's the intelligence community. Community sounds nice, but we're talking the intelligence system, you see, has been insulated, from the normal controls and accountability of the United States government. Now, why was that? Well, it was because, and this was rationalized from the very beginning, you see, of the peculiar threat, posed by the Soviet Union. So that even though it was recognized that this institution, these processes were anomalous and contrary to the United States political and legal systems, yet they had to be allowed because we were facing this terrible threat. And this, allows for abuse. Of course, we hate to go back to Lord Acton, but we so frequently do, is that
Power corrupts, absolutely.
Absolutely. And this is what has happened. There have been one exposure after another. We had, of course, the Watergate affair. We had the Church Committee and the Pike Committee hearings in the 1970s. We had Iran-Contra. We've had since then, more exposures, and yet basically, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. Well, what has changed, as a matter of fact, is that the rationale for this, the existence of this immediate, threat to our national, not just our national security, a term, by the way, which has no definition in law, but our national survival, was threatened by the existence of the Soviet Union. So we had to do it, right? Soviet Union is now history. So now we are facing a situation, of course, where we want to look and see, all right, do we still need this? Do we still want this? And what dangers does it pose? And this gets back, I think, to part of the question that you asked with regard to the exposures of Iran-Contra and the fact that no one was held to account for them. If I were teaching a college course again, I would organize it around the final report of independent counsel Lawrence Walsh, a very conservative, Nixon-appointed federal judge, retired and in private practice, who was selected by none other than Edwin Meese to be the independent counsel to investigate Iran-Contra. And he subsequently, of course, wound up coming very close to indicting Meese and discussing him in very unfavorable terms in his final report.
And of course, he was clobbered by the ones who appointed him.
Clobbered in the sense, you see, that his close to 7-year effort, you see, was denigrated very largely as a waste of money. Well, in one sense it was, because despite returning numerous indictments, despite getting numerous convictions, most of them overturned on technical grounds, you see, none of the publicly exposed rascals, went to jail. And as they stayed out, one of them, of course, ran for United States Senator in Virginia
North
this
not
year.
only was not convicted, but
He was convicted.
He was convicted, but became a national hero and almost won the senatorial race in Carolina.
No, in Virginia.
Yeah, I'm sorry, in Virginia. Almost won it. So we have something going on here as far as public opinion is concerned.
Yeah, I think we definitely do. I think, Studs, we of all of us, all of us who've lived through the post-war period, to a very considerable extent have been formed by that experience. The fact of the Soviet Union, and whether it was correctly defined, by succeeding United States administrations, the presidential administrations, as the threat it was alleged to be, is true or not, is something which we will be debating historically for many years, and we certainly can't get into it here.
We knew they were on their butt at the end of World War II
sure.
with their losses. That much we do know.
Yeah, but we do. I think we talked about that a little before, but I'm going to say, that while the Soviet Union was on its butt as a nation, as a society, because of the beating it took during the Second World War, its international prestige was very, very high, and its ideological influence, in fact, was strong. I mean, you have to accept that as part of the perceived threat.
Talking about reputation.
Yeah, but you see what we're talking about here, you see, is that for good or ill, I believe, because we're talking about public opinion here, right, is the United States people need and want to have some sort of threat.
Now we come to the big
them.
one. We're continuing. This is a conversation I wanted to have for a long time with Dave MacMichel, whom you can gather I obviously admire, who is ex-CIA operative from the headquarters in Langley, Virginia, who was one of the founders of the Association of National Security Alumni of former CIA bureau chiefs in many cases and operatives who decided something is cockeyed here, there's a lie being presented to the public, and they want to challenge it. They weren't very much involved in the creation of that. This is a memoir, in a sense, an oral memoir and reflection of Dave MacMichel. And so we come. No more evil empire. I have no idea what the military budget is. I know that you know Admiral retired Jean LaRocque.
Very well.
A remarkable, by the way, war hero, and a big guy in the War College who could be anything he wanted to be in the Navy, had he been so inclined, but who's seeking a sort of truth. You can't call him a peacenik of sorts or whatever. He was in every battle, and he's founded a group called the Center for Defense Information, monitoring the Pentagon. And he speaks of the wars we were in. So pick up on this matter of needing an enemy now that there's no evil empire.
Well, as you know, in the last 2 years particularly, but the beginning before that, they had what they called a bottom-up, zero-based reevaluation of the threat. And basically the justification, strategic justification for the current level of United States security or military spending, to say it more politely, is that the United States must be prepared to fight simultaneously two wars on the level of the Persian Gulf War. Now, whether this is in any way likely or not is almost beside the point. This is the current gospel, and this is what these projections go for. Now, I think it's very important to talk in understandable quantitative terms on this. The United States spends currently approximately $280 billions of dollars. I'll even pare that down just to avoid being controversial. We'll say $260 billions of dollars.
Billions.
Billions of dollars we're talking on national security spending, of which, by the way, approximately $28 billion is expended on the intelligence system, roughly 12% of that amount. Now let's put this in perspective. You see, that $280 billion is more, 260 let's say, is more than the whole rest of the world spends on its military. We're like more than half. We're approximately half. $28 billion, which we spend on so-called intelligence, is an amount equal to the defense budgets of such countries, or in some cases exceeding them, of West Germany, of France, of the United Kingdom, of Japan, who are among the big, spenders. So we're laying out large bucks on this. Now the question comes up, because you remember the slogan of the 1992 election, it's the economy stupid, right? Well, it's still the economy stupid. And currently we're watching a Congress which is whacking away at domestic programs, which is very concerned about the deficit, and rightly so, because that has a lot to do with the interest rates you pay when you buy your house or car or anything else. And and we're still projecting this immense deficit. And when you look down there, you say, what is being untouched in all of this? Well, it is this immense military budget. And so these bureaucracies which control these budgets in the Pentagon and in the intelligence system, I mean, they operate like any bureaucracy. They fight to maintain their budget. And how do they justify the budget? Well, they have to justify it in terms of presenting a threat in this case. And some of these threats, do not really stand up under a whole lot of analysis. But one thing, and I think I'm philosophizing here and talking from no knowledge, this is merely opinion, as you know. The one thing that they have learned to rely upon since roughly 1948, when Harry Truman was advised to scare the people to death.
Harry Truman was advised by a Republican senator of Michigan, Vandenberg.
That's right.
We got to scare the hell out of the American people to get a bigger budget.
That's why.
Scare them about the
That's
Soviet
right. So, the public is going to be routinely scared. And see, I dealt with one small little area in which the public was going to be scared. The threat posed by Nicaragua, a country of about 2.5 million souls. Gary Trudeau did a wonderful Doonesbury cartoon. At one time, President Reagan, cautioned us that Managua was only about 1,200 miles from Harlingen, Texas. So Gary Trudeau, you may remember this cartoon, draws this picture. It's a living room in Harlingen, Texas. This guy is peering out through the Venetian blinds at the night. His wife says, "Is it quiet out there?" He says, "Yeah, too quiet,
By the way, Reagan did say, President Reagan, looks like the Nicaraguans may invade us.
Yes, well,
through Harlingen, Texas, the 2 million may invade us.
Yes, they had an unfortunate line in their party anthem, which referred to Los Yankees, enemigos de la humanidad, the Yankees, the enemies of humanity. You see, so this proved their intent.
So here now, enemy. Who is the enemy now? The one we must
There we
have
are. You
these
see,
billions.
we find it hard to give it a name. You see, when we had the evil empire, it was there. We can talk about Islamic extremism, but of course we have to talk about it cautiously because we have very large interests in oil-producing countries which are Islamic in nature. We can talk about something as vague as international terrorism, which, by definition is not susceptible to confrontation by standard military forces. We've got the drug war. And a matter of fact, one of our members is Mike Levine, whom you may have interviewed at some time, a former DEA agent who was exposed what the drug war is all
By the way,
about.
let's not leave that drug war
Yeah.
and the role of the CIA, if we may, along the line somewhere
sure.
here. Cocaine or drug traffic in this country, pre-CIA involvement and Vietnam and post.
Yes.
Save that for. I don't mean to interrupt you.
No. I think it's important.
Keep going.
Well, all I can tell you is that there is a very significant battle, and we're following the money here. For people to
So
defend very large
therefore,
budgets.
The Congress today, as it is, hardly touches this military budget, even though the evil empire, the raison d'etre for the big thing, 99.99% of it is gone. There got to be new ones created. Whereas the welfare mother will hit her, which is minuscule, obviously, when it comes to dough and budget, with the other stuff that's untouched. So that's how that. Now, how do you understand? So I thought the media was called a liberal media. Now it has the medium.
That's a liberal interpretation of liberal.
It's a liberal interpretation of a liberal so-called. I suppose that plays a role in all this, does it not? Public opinion.
Yeah, I think, Studs, I really don't want to drag this out because this is, I'm getting beyond anything which I can pretend to competence in. But I would like very much to see this matter tested during forthcoming elections, to see if, in fact, people can run against, overblown so-called national security spending and succeed. I have a belief, that this will happen. As you know, I took a rather extensive tour of the United States this year and talked to a lot of people in public parks and whatnot.
What's the reaction you found?
And when this would come up, just sitting around talking to groups at Lions Club picnics and,
I was about to ask, the people you talked to were not converted people in advance.
No.
They were just
How would I
talking
know?
about a wide variety.
Yeah, they're just people that I sat down, talked to in cafes, public parks, or
So
whatnot.
for want of a better phrase, middle America.
Yeah, and they want to know who I was, and what I was doing and so forth. I tell them, and I wasn't out there to carry out any propaganda effort, but I'd raise this. And I would say that the huge majority of responses, was very sympathetic to the view that this is an area too that has to be cut, But they say you're running up against a lot of conventional political wisdom that, you're dead if you run against national security, you see. Well, the point is, of course, is to define national security. And this is an educational process. And once again, we're going to follow the money, you see, because nothing captures people's attention much more than putting up large dollar signs in front of them.
And so following the money. And now we come to something. We again and again, there are drugs in our lives, whether it be crime on the streets, whether it be international traffic, whether it be the Colombian cartel. Drugs and an outfit which you once very familiar, the CIA. And there was a book written by Alfred McCoy.
Al McCoy, Politics of Heroin in Southeast Asia,
and
still
I
the
remember
standard
I did
book.
a 2-hour program, it was years ago, and what was astonishing about the book, not only was the specific facts, chapter, verse, he said there was far less drug traffic in our country today, far less before the Vietnam War, and before the role of the CIA in it than there is today. He was implicating, if I remember right, the CIA and drug traffic. Would you mind?
Yeah,
taking
look,
off
let
on
me tell you something
All right.
that's about this. Is I would never go so far, although sometimes I feel I would like to, as to say, look, the CIA or this or that element in the United States security establishment encouraged, supported, profited from narcotics trafficking. I just won't say it because I couldn't prove it the first way. But I will tell you something I can prove. is that when you begin to conduct so-called covert operations from United States soil and to carry them out in areas of the world such as Southeast Asia, the old Golden Triangle area, such as the Middle East, the areas of...
when we say Golden Triangle, just
yeah, well, the old
clear.
golden...
We forget many of the
Yeah,
people
sure.
listening are young and don't know.
Yeah.
And many who do know don't know. Explain it slightly.
The old Golden Triangle were those areas in Laos, Burma, and Thailand, where those borders come together, in which much of the world's basic opium crop was grown, and in those areas where much of it was refined into heroin. And the controlling element for that, as Al McCoy told you years ago, was the remnants of the old Kuomintang, as the Chinese nationalist armies operating with CIA sponsorship on the southern borders of China. And they controlled the traffic there and supported themselves largely by it. The same thing happened, as you know, in where we sponsored the opposition to the Soviet-imposed rule in Afghanistan. The lead guerrilla operator there, Mr. MacMichel, who's still around. And we would still like to get those Stingers missiles back from him, by the way. But, controls a great amount of the current heroin production and distribution from that area. Cocaine, you see, channeled through Central America while we run the operation. What I want to say is this, is that when you set up a situation where, for operational purposes, you are looking the other way, or where you're having a significant amount of air and ship traffic, which is going in and out of the United States under cover of a covert operation, which is not subject to normal customs inspection or police inspection. You see, you open up enormous opportunities for the kind of people you recruit into these types of operations. And believe me, it is, listen, something. You guys in Chicago here lived a long time ago through Prohibition. You know something about the way, illegal markets are organized and operate. So it's no surprise. What I will tell people is that covert operations and the drug trafficking go together like dogs and fleas. That's just the way it works. I mean, there's no denying that. Al McCoy demonstrated carefully in Southeast Asia. Bob Parry and others have demonstrated it, and Leslie Coburn and Peter Dale Scott very carefully in the case of Central America.
People who have been establishment journalists.
Sure.
Robert Parry, for example, has an excellent track record. And where
Very
was he
good.
last before, when he was still mainstream? Now he's challenging because some of his stuff has been killed through the years.
Yeah, Bob's a very fine, very sound
And he's
journalist.
been covering Haiti. Where was he last? Let's see.
Oh, Bob was doing, matter of fact, his last big projects for a public television frontline was on the so-called October Surprise affair. But he was, and previous to that was with Newsweek and then with Associated
So there are
Press.
certain journalists, a minority, of course, because it takes
some
a
are
certain
very
courage and loss of job to do that, as it does CIA guys.
That's a factor.
We have to ask you about now, events and
Good,
situations,
'cause
and
this is something I want to talk about.
what you see. This is sort of a roundup of everything. It's as you can see, sort of an informal oral memoir of Dave MacMichel, former CIA operative from the headquarters at Langley, Virginia, who was one of the founders of the Association for the National Security of Alumni. Still around and about the group of graduates.
we're still functioning after a fashion. We're maybe functioning is not even the right word, but we're still together.
But as we pick up the news, each day there's some aspect of it. I'll ask about Haiti in a moment. The guys the junta boys who did, some were CIA trained, were they not? Some were, of the Haitian guys.
That is true.
Oh boy. And the CIA's attitude toward Aristide is not the most beneficent, I take it.
That I can tell you a good story about that too.
Please.
I sat and talked with Senator Harkins a week ago of Iowa. And, Senator Harkins had been one of the supporters of the return to office, constitutional office of President Aristide in Haiti. And you may recall that at about the time a year or so ago when the pressure was on to carry out this particular aspect of American policy, the CIA gave a briefing, a supposedly closed-door briefing, to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee under the redoubtable Senator Jesse Helms, at which a former colleague of mine, whose name was in the newspapers at the time, so I can give it to you, is Brian Littell, a man with whom I clashed frequently during my years, appeared and gave this horrific description of President Aristide as a murderous psychopath. And Harkins described how after that meeting, which he did not attend, several other senators came back from to his office, knowing his support for Aristide, and said, "Tom, we can't support this guy. I mean, this guy is this is awful." So Senator Harkins called for the then Director of Central Intelligence, recently departed R. James Woolsey, to come to his office. "What is this?" "Oh, yes." He said, This is it?" He said, "Well," he said, "you've described Aristide's hospitalization in Canada for these psychopathic tendencies. I want to check with that hospital. Can you give me the name of the hospital?" "No, I can't do that. That would reveal our sources and methods." To tell you how the childish level to which this went is that after several days of back and forthing on this, Mr. Woolsey finally came to Senator Harkins' office and presented him with a list of 10 hospitals in Canada. He said, "One of them might be it." He said, "But you'll have to find it."
Oh, boy.
And as a matter of fact, he did find it very easily. The hospital denied all, you see. And there were other aspects of this, too, but it tells you why Jim Woolsey wore out his
welcome. We have
welcome.
a number of columnists here in town as elsewhere who speak of him as.
Oh, yeah.
So we have the liberal press, of course.
Yeah, well, you see, this was a very
So-called.
clear, and I feel very badly about this one, because a very clear attempt by persons within the security establishment who opposed the Haitian policy to do this. And you're asking, for example, yes, all the persons, directing that murderous military regime there, in fact, at one time or another, were on the CIA payroll. We've just had this case, which you know about, where Jennifer Hanbury.
A word about that. As
Yes,
you're
sir.
talking right now,
Yeah.
Dave, Mike, and I, a young American, Jennifer, is it
Hanbury.
Hanbury, was married to a Guatemalan guy who was fighting whoever the junta is, the brutes there, was missing. Pick up on, and we just got the news the other day. Why don't you tell it?
Yeah, well, in fact, Jennifer has been around for the last couple of years in a campaign trying to find out what had, in fact, had happened to her husband. She had information that he had been captured alive and, believed he might still be alive and wanted to find him, naturally enough. This was denied. It was claimed he'd been killed in fighting in Guatemala. And just within the last 2 days, from a surprising source, Congressman Bob Torricelli, Democrat of New Jersey, on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, came forward and announced that, in fact, Hanbury, as well as an American citizen, a man named Michael Devine, who'd run a hotel down in Guatemala, had in fact been assassinated by a named Guatemalan military official who, it happens, was a paid agent of the Central Intelligence Agency. What makes this even more heinous is that Mr. Torricelli revealed that this information had in fact been known and established within the United States government for quite a few months and had been officially denied. And this is a first-rate scandal, but we've had them before. American nuns who were shot down in El Salvador, young Americans.
As you're talking, I'm
but-
thinking of all the stuff that adds up, the Chilean situation,
Oh,
the
sure.
Pinochet and
It's a
those who back,
sad
the
history.
destabilization of Allende legally elected. And we go down the line, El Salvador, the death squads and the connection with the being trained. Dobosan death squad guy was trained here
And
too.
I
wasn't he?
want us to, if I can, I'd
Yeah.
like to jump in because I know we don't have a lot of time right
Go
now.
ahead.
Because we're talking about El Salvador in the early 1980s, a scary situation. I mean, scary. We had an ambassador, the last Carter ambassador down in El Salvador. His name was Robert White. Bob White, who now heads the Center for International Policy in Washington, D.C., a distinguished Foreign Service officer, also former ambassador to Paraguay, had the sad duty in 1980 of going to the roadside outside of San Salvador and excavating the bodies of 4 American nuns, who had been brutally raped and murdered by the Salvadoran security forces. In any case, Mr. White had a lot of problems with the Central Intelligence Agency in El Salvador. And as a matter of fact, had the rare distinction of firing his Central Intelligence Agency station chief down there on the grounds that they simply refused to report to him on the doings of a certain Colonel Carranza, Nicholas Carranza, who was d'Aubisson's boss and who was also a CIA agent. Now, Bob came away from that experience in El Salvador a very bruised person. And in his current capacity as head of the Center for International Policy, a not-for-profit group in Washington, he has organized a study which will be held sort of as the parallel study to the Aspen Commission, which is looking at the future of our intelligence system, the official body. And he is going to, and I'm proud to say I'm associated with this study, carry out a very high-profile examination of, in fact, what are the intelligence needs of the United States in this post-Cold War period. How should they be carried out, and what rules should be laid down? And I have great hopes that this study, which is to be carried out on a national basis to engage through groups throughout the country, a high-level public debate on this, make it a political issue for 1996, that maybe we can get it off the dime.
Well, this, of course, I was about to ask you, what's to be done, and you just said it in a sense, to make this a key issue to open up all the books.
I hope so. I'll tell you, Studs, when we started talking about this a while ago, I said, you start with the constitutional issue, which is always a mistake because, like they say, who cares about the Constitution, really? You try...
Well, Ollie North made that clear way back.
Of course he did.
It doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah.
I'm doing it.
Yeah, sure.
I tell you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, these guys, they could care less. It just gets in the way. All right, so you try it from the humanitarian angle. You bring out the bodies and lay them out there. It doesn't seem to make a huge amount of impression. Okay, you're looking at, in this case, and I hate to get down to this level,
Go ahead.
but I can get down pretty low, is we're looking at the money again. And if we can, I want to see the constitutional issue brought forward. I want to see the foreign policy issue.
You want to see humanitarianism, but by God, you're saying follow them. What's it going to cost me that I should not have to pay?
That's right.
So if I get off the dime of a welfare mother and speak of what is 50 million times more expensive.
Absolutely.
Maybe I might be close to making $1 or $2.
Yeah. I really, that sounds pretty cynical.
No, it isn't cynical.
But I'm
afraid it's realistic
But we
at
want,
the moment.
this is a country like any other country that needs political solutions.
There's
and
a lot more
to
to ask Dave MacMichel, but I think this first hour is a very revealing one indeed, and I hope we have another one to follow up, and I hope, too, you have a book forthcoming, your own memoir involving all this, too. And this by way of...
Oh, that mine enemy would write a book, as they say.
By way of thanking you very much indeed.
Okay, well, thanks for having me, and I'd like, in closing, to say that as we get going on this other, if we get another chance and we can get Mr. Bob White in here, I think you'd like to talk to him.
He was a guest once upon a time here,
good.
but I'd love to have an encore with him and you together. Thank you very much.
Terrific.